Good day, Anne-Marie. If we target the oil and gas sector for Putin and the Russians, in this case the Russian energy establishment, then prices would spike. Perhaps he would sell only half of his product, but for double the price. That means he would not suffer the consequences, while the United States and our allies would suffer the consequences.
Western European countries so reliant on Putin for the lifeblood of their economy. Now, this is the one sanction that would be the single most effective, and it's the one they're willing the least to do. Ask yourself why.
I hope a number of those climate alarmists are watching your program this evening, because you are absolutely correct in that we have scaled back American energy production and become much more reliant upon Russian energy, Russian oil. So you're right. It doesn't matter where that oil is coming from. All I know is that we have lost 71,000 energy jobs here in the United States. We have ratcheted back on American energy production and become much more reliant upon Russian oil.
Hello and welcome to Wednesday Reading. Today's assignment centers around what's happening with Russia-Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine it's a constant in the news cycle right now. Opinions are burning white hot about, what we should do, how we should get involved here in the United States. The president has decided that he will sanction the Russian government in an effort to deter Russia's efforts rather than sending troops. The hope is that we don't. The hope is that we're able to save some American lives and we don't have any military bloodshed on our end. President Biden has chosen to restrict travel to Russian planes. He's chosen to freeze bank accounts, tied to Russia, among other things, of course. He has not, however, chosen to stop oil imports, and that has become a topic of discussion, especially considering how important oil imports and exports are for both the United States and for Russia, and where their oil kind of goes to. So that decision not to do that has caused some very strong opinions on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. There's a strong argument for both sides, as in whether we should or should not sanction that oil. Today, you will read an argument that supports the sanctions. You will read an argument that does not support the sanctions and says that we should, in fact, cut off oil and stop the import-export of that. You can read the audiobook of the two articles by scanning the QR code in the lower right corner of this video. The articles are also linked at the right in Edpuzzle over there. It might behoove you to listen to it while you read it. That might be helpful. You have two tasks while reading the articles today. And before we get started, I'd like to present to you the scale. At the end of today's lesson, you will be asked to identify where you think you land on this scale in terms of your understanding, right? You've got a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1. Each one sort of asks you to analyze where you're at, right? A 4 means that you have the best understanding, like you feel really good about where you're at. A 3 means that you have a pretty good understanding of how to accomplish our learning goal, which is to take an idea, figure out the main points, and then be able to contrast it with an opposing idea. And then a 2 would mean that you're not confident doing that, and a 1 means you're like, I don't even know where to start. I'm going to ask today that you give this your full efforts, that you give this you put your best foot forward, so to speak. Lean in, give it a read. It's okay if you're going to forget it. I'm going to talk you through a couple of pieces. We just need to practice reading. We just need to keep working through it. So rate yourself on that scale now. It is the opportunity to respond is at the right. And then we'll talk about the next part. You have two tasks while reading the articles today. The first is to identify the main point of the article. It shows up in one direct statement. I would say oftentimes if this were like a research paper or a paper like that, that's an academic paper, it would be called your thesis statement, the author's thesis statement. That doesn't quite apply to journalistic writing. So what's the author's main point? What are they trying to argue? And then what evidence did they use to support that? It might be quotes, it might be statistics, it might be anecdotal evidence. So there's lots of different things that the author can use to provide evidence to support their main point. Your job is to find that evidence. And the second thing that I've asked you to do, or that I'm going to ask you to do while you read, is start to just think about some of those inconsistencies between the two arguments. They're saying this, that we shouldn't sanction for these reasons. They're saying that we should for these reasons. Maybe the author in this article brought up information that this author didn't. You know what I mean? So why did one of the authors bring up information and the other decide to omit it? That's going to be something that you might, if you identify that, if you see some of that, might be worth questioning. So go ahead and start reading. Remember, too, that you can use the audiobook to read along with you as you're reading the article. So remember, now that you've read the articles, I gave you two tasks while you were reading. The first was to identify the main point and some of the evidence that the author used to figure out what it is that the author's, how the evidence that the author is using to. So I gave you two tasks while reading. The first is to identify the main point of the article and the evidence that the author uses to prove that, to support that main point. And the second was to identify inconsistencies between the two arguments. And so now remember that our goal is to identify those inconsistencies between the two articles. What I'm going to have you do now is take a look at the two articles sort of side by side, if you can have two tabs open, and you're going to send me an email. And in that email, I want you to write 2 if-then statements. These if-then statements should be what identify those inconsistencies. If blank, blank, blank in Article 1, then why blank, blank, blank in Article 2? And this is where you should be figuring out, you should have identified those differences. I don't know if you highlight them. I don't know if you write them down. I guess I don't know which is going to work best for you. But I do want you to be looking at what it is that is different and look to separate them. If this, then why this? Not asking you to have answers to those questions. Having answers to those questions, ask for your opinion on the topic. That is not what I'm asking for with this assignment. I'm more looking for with a topic right now that has very clear sides, that has two very clear, distinct sides to it. I'm looking for you to be able to identify the differences. That's the main thing that I want you to be able to do at the moment. Say, hey, they brought this up. They brought this up. Why are they different? And now at the end here, let's take a look at some of the evidence that you should have identified as, or could have identified as parts that support the main ideas. From Article 1, which is titled "Why Biden is Going Easy," some estimates indicate, this was on, I want to say about page 5. Some estimates indicate that the pipeline may have eventually reduced Russian oil imports, but that it is unlikely that if the project continued, it would currently be complete. Ferguson said the Russian imports are funding Putin's war efforts. Why in the world would we continue to buy Russian, or every barrel of oil that we buy has Ukraine blood in it? We got to put an end to that. He argued that the president should adopt an all-of-the-above strategy that really focuses on the resources that this great country has. We can produce more clean American energy here using American natural gas and American oil, Ferguson said. We can supply ourselves and we can supply our allies. And we don't have to keep funding this horrible regime in Russia. There's no place for this. There should be smarter policies by the American government. So that's one example of why we should impose sanctions on the Russian government. And it's evidence that side uses. Now, the other side that says, here's why we're not, says this from Article 2. Blocking the flow could add $40 to the price of a barrel of the crude oil benchmark, which now stands at $98. Such a spike would cause the prices of everything from transportation fuels to food to soar, and would likely cause civic unrest. The US and the EU will levy sweeping sanctions, but will not halt Russian energy exports, as that would cause a recession in Europe, investment research firm BCA Research said in an analyst note. European policy leaders would likely fall from power in the coming years if there were to be a full-scale energy crisis. But while increasing how much US gas flows in Europe could help offset Russia's power, in the long term, it would come years too late to influence the current situation. Boosting shipments requires not only building more export facilities in the United States, projects that take many years and billions of dollars to construct, but also more receiving terminals at Europe's already congested ports. So that's evidence that you could have used. I'm not saying that you have to use those, but that's evidence that you could have used that supports the here's why we're sanctioning, here's why we shouldn't sanction, right? It would cause a recession in Europe because the price of oil would jump so high, so we can't put sanctions on that oil because of how much oil they export, right? But the other argument for saying that we should sanction is just start drilling in the United States. Now, there's information, it appears to me that there's information that was left out on both sides. The just start drilling in the United States side left out the fact that if oil prices jumped that high, that there would be a recession in the United States. That article didn't seem to care about that. However, the second article that said there would be a recession if oil prices jumped $40 left out the fact that we could start drilling in the United States. What are the effects of drilling in the United States, and how does that change the opinion of sort of either side of that? Do you see the if-then issues that we have there? So I just kind of talked through two of them, and I hope that discussion helps sort of make connections that need to be made. At this point on the screen, you will see a scale, a learning scale, a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1. Please pause the video to read thoroughly what it means to be at a 4, what it means to be at a 3, what it means to be at a 2, what it means to be at a 1, and answer honestly about where you're at. Because the more clear we are about where you're at with this and your ability to take two arguments and identify the differences between them, helps me to help you. And that's what I want. I want you to be able to look at these and go, I just am not there. I'm just not sharp enough. I just don't quite get it. So if you are honest with me about that, I can help you. It is as much an assessment of me as it is of you, because I can change what I do to help you reach that 3, because that 3 is where we want to get to. So go ahead and take a look at those and go ahead and decide where you think you land.